Good morning. Hello, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Christine Van Leeuwen, and I'm a member of the Illuminating Engineering Society and the Marketing and Communications Chair for the IES Raleigh section. I would like to welcome you to our presentation on Lighting 101, Circadian Lighting for Senior Living. Let me introduce you to Dr. Lynn Davis, fellow at RTI International, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you very much, Christine. And it is certainly a pleasure to have everyone here today for this wonderful seminar on circadian lighting for senior living. We've got two outstanding presenters today that you'll hear from, Eunice Noell-Waggoner and Laurie Emery. And by way of background, Eunice is president of the Center of Design for an Aging Society and is focused on interior and lighting design for public buildings and has been concentrating on lighting for aging, vision, and health over the second half of her career. She's active in research with both Pacific Northwest National Labs and Brown University, and also is a founder and a current member of the IES Committee on Lighting for the Aged and Partially Sighted. Laurie is a healthcare marketing specialist with Vista Lighting, and an experienced lighting designer, has worked on many projects in commercial, education, retail, and hospitality, senior living, and healthcare. He's also active in research in modern lighting technologies and their applications in the healthcare market, and supports specifiers through training of lighting solutions to enhance healthcare applications and patient well-being. So we're very privileged to have these two wonderful speakers today. And this webinar we'll cover several areas of circadian lighting for seniors, including talking about common eye diseases, how these eye diseases affect light entering the eye, the senior eye, and how this reduction in light impacts not only vision, but also circadian rhythm. And with this information, we'll provide some guidance. Our speakers will provide guidance on how to understand how to modify lighting designs to be more compatible with the aging eye. And also there's actually an IES guideline, RP28, that covers lighting for lighting in the visual environment for older adults and the visually impaired. And we'll introduce that as well. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Eunice, and we can start the webinar.
Morning, everyone, and thank you for attending. It's a really important issue that I'd like to address with you, and it's not just for you professionally, but think of your family members. Like everybody's got older parents or grandparents, aunts and uncles, and so if you could maybe apply some of the information that we're going to be having today to your personal life as well as your professional life. So these are the topics we're going to cover. First, I will be talking about aging vision, then Laurie will be talking about circadian, and then I'll be back to lighting design. So this is the diagram of the eye, but just it follows through all the different changes that happen as we age, and these are normal age-related changes, not eye diseases. So everybody's going to get a dose of this, some more, some less, but these are the things that we need to focus on. As we go through this, you'll understand that the light coming into the eye gets absorbed throughout that whole passage so that less light reaches the retina. And that's the important part for circadian rhythm. So, but the lens of the eye gets kind of large and it's hard to focus, and it turns a slightly amber color, which guess what? Cancels the blue range. So cataract surgery is recommended for anybody that cares about the vision or their circadian rhythm. So it scatters light within the eye. So, and that scattered light within the eye also impacts your contrast sensitivity. So as pupils get smaller, they don't adjust so quickly from a bright daylight to a dim interior light. So there's much longer time for adaptation. And also the retina begins to deteriorate. So it's the combination of how an older person gets light into their eyes, how, what's their body posture, because most older people have, if they're bending forward, it's kind of like a 5 to 8 degree tilt forward. Well, then they're looking more at the ground rather than up. So these are important factors when we're trying to get light in the eye. So there's quite a bit of information packed on this one slide. One is the artist's rendering. This was after cataract surgery in the right eye and before cataract surgery in the left eye. So you can see how different that is once the lens has been replaced. When my mother was going through this, she would watch TV covering one hand on, she would call it her bad eye, the one that hadn't had the surgery, because there's generally a month lag between the two surgeries just to make certain it's okay. So she would always say, I want to watch TV with my good eye. So you could see how different that would be for her. Also, as I mentioned, light gets absorbed all along the visual pathway. And so when you compare the light entering or reaching the retina of an older person, say in their 80s, compared to somebody in their 20s, the people who are age 80 only get 20% of the light clear back to the retina, which is important for the circadian rhythm. So you have to understand that older people need higher levels of light, but also glare is enemy number one. So how do we do that? Next. So these are common eye diseases that are more prevalent as people age. You can see the normal vision is the top left slide. That's what they would see. But then you drop down and see cataracts. You're seeing blurry, no clear definitions in going across diabetic retinopathy, where there's little spots where there's blood vessels have broken in the retina. And so you have this spottiness compared to, I would drop down to macular degeneration, where it is very central. Macula is degenerating, and so it's hard to see something right in front of you. They tend to look to the side of their eye using their peripheral vision to really see better, because that big black spot is not allowing them to, one, recognize faces of people right in front of them. In fact, again, my mother had macular degeneration, and as she progressed, well, she passed at 103, so she had a full long life, but yet she couldn't tell which daughter was standing in front of her. She would say something, and then I'd speak. I'd just say, well, what do you want me to say, Mom? Oh, you're Eunice. It was just like she couldn't trust her vision anymore when I was standing right in front of her. So, and I was a known person. So, and then glaucoma is like tunnel vision, where it kind of comes in from the side. And so you have a very limited field of view. So all of these changes happen to impact not just circadian, but talk about falls. It's in the resource file that we've attached to this presentation. There's a number of different articles on how it's not visual acuity, it's loss of contrast sensitivity that really needs to be checked out. So there's a whole range of things that really need to be looked at, and an eye chart that measures how much loss of contrast sensitivity you have will help you understand better how you navigate in an environment. However, on the most eye charts don't have that measurement. They only just measure acuity, not contrast sensitivity. So next slide. Thank you. There's also this issue called low vision, where surgery, medicine, glasses, all of that doesn't work anymore. That they have what they have. They can't It cannot be improved. So these folks really rely on a physical environment that helps them. It creates greater contrast between objects and their background, from door frames to walls, from walls to floors. These are very essential for people to be able to navigate in space. Also, signage is a very important thing where we need to improve contrast for these folks. But I just want to point out that this graph from the NIE that I'm showing here, you could see that glaucoma greatly impacts African Americans and Hispanics, much more so than Caucasian people or the others, everyone else is in the other category. So when you do a research study about diseases, if there's a high African American population in a nursing home, then you know that you have greater problems that need to be addressed with that physical environment and the lighting. Next slide. This adaptation, as I mentioned before, is a difficult problem. This is downtown building. I'm in Portland, Oregon. So now if there's engineers in the audience, this is something you can control. You can make certain that the light inside the entryway is closer to what there's a better transition in what we've got here from the outside light, where it's bright light outside, daylight, but then once you're in this dark entryway and glass doors of all things, people with older vision will not be able to adapt in time. And sometimes it takes a full half hour to totally adapt. So it's, making transition areas more balanced would be a great aid. And then lose those glass doors or put something more than just that handrail that they might not see because it's chrome. So next slide. So you've heard me talk about contrast. So this graph just shows by age, how much you would have to increase the contrast in that environment to be equal to what someone who's 20 years old would see. So, so some of it's average, but if you tried to serve 90% of those 60 years, only 60 years old, how many people are 60 years old? A lot of them. So you would need 5.5 times more contrast for those people to be able to see an object in front of them, a curb, wherever that is. And so it's more of a probably an interior designer's selection on how much contrast they use. But if you can make people aware that it's really important, even though you could refer them to this presentation so that they understand if they didn't attend in this meeting. Next slide. Okay, so this is kind of a build up to get into Laurie's talk, because the sleep problem of older people, for everyone, whether you live in the community or whether you're living in a nursing home, it's a problem, but it's more problematic in nursing homes than in the community. So, older people don't sleep as soundly, and if they're memory care units, they could become really agitated because they don't understand that it's really nighttime. And if you've got the same bright light on in that corridor that you had during the day, how are they supposed to know it's not daytime and it's time to get up? So, and there's cognitive issues like how alert are you during the day if you don't sleep well at night? And there's many research studies out there that identify too much light and too much noise at night disrupting the sleep of people in nursing homes. So if you design in the care facilities, please dim down that light in the corridor and try to get the staff to quiet down, and Laurie's going to address that a little bit more than I will. Next slide. So this is the amber nightlight that I prefer. There's different ones out there, but if you're using a nightlight and you put it in the room where someone sleeps, please have a motion sensor on it. Do not have that light on all night long. Just have a motion sensor so that it will come on only when the person gets up to go to the bathroom or whatever they're doing. But it lights. But you could also light the path. If, say, the bathroom's down the hall, you should light the whole pathway to that facility that they'll probably use in the middle of the night. So thank you much, and I'll hand you over to Laurie. Take off from here.
Okay. So yeah, we're going to get in a little bit more about how we can potentially help support the folks. Oh, sorry. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can, through the circadian rhythm, and how this affects the vision of specifically dealing with the aging population. Next, please. So it's basically getting down to the biology of the human body clock. All of us are born with this human biology that we have this somewhat 24-hour circadian rhythm. It's not exactly 24 hours. It's typically 24.2 hours. And so what we find is that if you're not entrained on at least if not daily, but at least maybe a few times a week, what you find out is that you begin to lose that difference between morning and evening. And so that can become a real problem for anybody, but specifically for elderly people, it gets to be more complicated. Because basically we want to have that that much brighter light in the morning and in the midday, because that light helps us to become a little more engaged with our environment. And then as it gets later in the day, we want to go down to that warmer amber light that helps keep our circadian rhythms balanced. Next, please. So I know that Eunice showed a little bit picture about some of the anatomy of the eye and how that works. One thing to understand is that, like she mentioned in her talk, is that when the light is entering the eye, only a percentage of it actually gets to the back of the eye, to the retina, where it's effective. And when we are looking at our vision and standpoint of the different receptors in the eyes, next, please, we see that the photoreceptors and the cones and rods, those are the part of our light, our vision, that actually helps us see. So that's going to, the rods typically are what we use. And you may have heard of PMS. Well, okay, from a lighting standpoint. We have photopic, scotopic, and mesopic vision. So photopic is the P, and that's typically how we see during the day. And I always think of the photopic side as, you know, the best photographs are taken during the day when we have good light. Mesopic vision happens as we begin to get dark, or the dusk comes. We can still see color because the rods are still activated. The cones are still activated. So we do have the RGB, we can see the color, but things begin to get a little fuzzy. What happens though is our peripheral vision gets a little bit better because the rods are more on the exterior side and they are more congenient to being able to see more of the peripheral. And that's when we get into scotopic vision, which is the evening darkness, fairly dark in that when we get to see more in gray. So in gray tones and so forth is where the rods really take place. And so that's how the PMS kind of comes in. It's just a good way to remember cells. The ganglion cells are actually not in, they do not do anything as far as our vision goes, but that is the main part of the cells that help communicate to the SCN part of our brain. And so what that does is it engages the light, brings the light in, and then the light is converted back into this energy that hits the back of our brain. So this is where we get into the real biology of the non-visual elements. And I try to simplify this a little bit. The IPRGCs, or intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells, these are what influences the entrainment in our brain. And we understand that melanopsin suppresses melatonin when activated by shortwave light. So that's where we talk about shortwave light, or this more blue color, very bright white blue color of light. This is what helps to, when the melanopsin is engaged and it helps suppress the melatonin, it helps us to become more active. The hypothalamus is what controls our hormones. So then we find out how all of these different things that are happening with the non-visual side are controlling everything in our body. The SCN, which is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, is our master clock. That actually is the master clock, actually controls all the cells in our body. Every cell in our body actually has a clock, but they all communicate with the master clock. And this is how everything functions in our body. And then we have the pineal gland, which then also produces melatonin, which takes over in the evening. And then the pituitary gland produces and releases hormones based on the different times of day. And the thought about how this all works is to keep our body in motion. It affects our digestive system. It affects the way our body functions through the day. Next. So if we take a look at this, we see that when melatonin is the dominant factor on this balance, that's when we're going to be going to sleep. But during the day, when we get this bright light, and serotonin and cortisol become the main part of what we're looking at, then it helps activate everything and helps us get going and have a good day and be able to be functioning throughout the day. These things change throughout the day, but this balance is really important. You may have heard things like bad things about cortisol. Well, so cortisol, it's good, but in too much quantity, it's not great. So what can happen is that in the early part of the day, we want more cortisol because it gives us some energy and it helps us to get through our mornings and to be more cognizant and awake. And it does decrease throughout the day, as it should, because too much cortisol, if we get too stressed out during the day, is going to affect our ability to fall asleep. And cortisol is directly linked to how much light we're getting throughout the day. Serotonin, I call it our happy hormone, regulates anxiety and circadian rhythm functions in the digestive system. So these are the really important hormones that we know that are all functioning through our body. And then as it gets into the evening and we start talking about sleep, so the sleep part of it is the sleep hormone of melatonin. Now, it doesn't make you sleep, but it helps you get sleepy, and you create the sleep pressure, which is what helps you to get sleepy and tired. And then that is produced by the pineal gland from serotonin. So as these different hormones are created through the day and things are happening in different balances, it begins to help your body through your 24-hour cycle. And it helps cause us to be sleepy. It lowers the body temperature and it brings on that sleep pressure to help us sleep better. So how do these vision problems affect our circadian rhythm? So if you were paying close attention to what Eunice was talking about, the different types of diseases that sometimes are affecting age. Now, you may not everybody may not get all of these things, but it seems to be that at some point there is something that happens. Pretty much everybody is going to get presbyopia. If you're nearsighted when you're younger, then it's probably going to make you a little more farsighted. And if you're farsighted, it's going to make you more nearsighted. And at some point, people that didn't have to wear glasses, when you get around your mid 40s to 50s, is when you're going to start seeing that you're going to need some sort of help wearing glasses. And then the other problem that we talked about was the smaller pupils, called pupillary miosis. And that's basically your pupils and the muscles don't open as much, and they're not as flexible as we get older. Cataracts, pretty much everybody at some point will get cataracts. It's a form of what happens with being exposed when you are exposed to UV. It's kind of like the yellowing of a lens. If you know how certain lighting products, especially plastics, will eventually yellow. Cataracts kind of are the same kind of thing. Your lens become more cloudy and typically a little bit more yellow. And so I always tell people, protect your eyes as long as you can and wear sunglasses and bright out when you're outside and it's really bright. But other more serious things that can happen are retinal detachment, glaucoma, and we talk about age-related macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy. But if you start really thinking about the things that really affect cataracts, glaucoma and age-related macular degeneration are probably some of the worst, as they start to restrict the way you can see and with getting light into the eye. If you remember the little visual of glaucoma and macular degeneration, basically glaucoma reduces and gives you a cone-like vision, and you reduces the amount of vision coming to the center of your eye. And then if you also have macular degeneration, which affects the center vision of your eye, then you can see where that begins to create a real problem in the vision of that eye and getting eye. So you have a reduction of light entering the eye, which now that's going to definitely create an issue with your circadian rhythm. Next slide, please. So what we are looking at now is that we have, Eunice mentioned a little bit of information of this. She was actually part of this particular study that was done for Alzheimer's and related dementias. And so when we start talking about light and color and, there's a lot of conversation out there about blue, certain wavelengths of light, SPD and color tuning and stuff like that. So what we found in the study that Eunice was part of was that they didn't notice necessarily a whole lot of difference between the 65K that you see on the right picture that was kind of the daytime setting at a very bright output. And then they would kind of transition to about a 41K at 100% output during the regular part of the day. And as evening would come up, they began to reduce the light output and warm up the light to like a 27K, which is what you see in that photo on the left. But what this did seem to create is, is a cue. So if the bright light and the more bluey white light was on in the morning, that was a cue coming from the residents that could see that this was, this is morning, this is time for me to kind of get up and get busy. And then during the day, they would just kind of stay in this more neutral light color. And then as evening would come in, get into this warmer tone. And that there's a couple things that happen when this light got warmer is that they reduced that light output to about 21% of the output. So it was much dimmer, it was much warmer. And so that cue gave not just the residents, but also the staff to, hey, it's bedtime, it's time for our residents to go to bed. Well, we can't turn the lights off altogether, but this cue is going to help the residents realize it's nighttime. It's this light is different, and we know that it's nighttime. And they found that the residents actually slept better. But I think probably what else contributed to this is the staff realized that they would be more quiet. And this was a time when any visitors would know that it was time for them to leave, so that the residents could get the proper rest. And they did notice that there were some changes that happened with this study that increased their sleep patterns, and they were a little bit better as a result of it. So we do know that there is some things associated with this color, and it does help drive some of that circadian thing that happens within our body, but it's also cue-based. So basically what we begin to find out is light in proper application will reset the human body clock for entrainment. Entrainment is important to keep up with that 24-hour cycle that we're used to. If entrainment does not happen, then what happens is our bodies get out of sync. And then when we might be waking up too early or too late, and then our bodies are kind of out of, I call it out of whack, whatever that, we don't know if we understand what whack means, but we get out of whack. And so our bodies don't necessarily go on that 24-hour cycle that's normal. So it's really important to understand the kind of things that our aging eyes are affected by, to know how to light these spaces. And Eunice is going to talk about that in the next segment of this presentation. Eunice, I think this is up to you now.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
So in the introduction, Lynn mentioned the RP28. Now that's the lighting in the visual environment for older adults and visually impaired, that was published in 2020. And Lynn also serves on this committee. So we are in the process of updating this RP, but haven't done that as yet. But it's one thing that we're working toward, and hopefully it won't be too long before we will have that out. So I've broken this down into environmental changes that help and the ones that hinder. So just having more light on the task really helps. And this is more of a personal device that this person is using, but it could be in a more public area where it's knowing how to navigate within the environment. So just in the, again, home application, but where you have to define the task, not just as reading tasks as we're sometimes accustomed to doing, but also just picking out medicines from the medicine cabinet, cooking. All of these things require more light and diffuse light, or something that's not glary. It's not coming into your eye so directly, so that you're avoiding the glare. Next slide. I mentioned contrast. Now, this is just one example of contrast that's very important, because there's so many falls that happen, even mortality accidents here on stairs. Falling downstairs is much more dangerous than falling up the stairs, as you can well imagine, because you might fall from the top and be clear at the bottom before you stop. So I've just shown the stair striping as one contrast, but back to the RP, there is actually a recommendation of having 30% contrast between floors and walls. It could be the floor base and the wall, just so that people can define where the walking surface is, and between an object and its background, or where the door is and the door frame, or handrails against the wall, thinking of all the areas where you could create more contrast so that these can be seen more readily and easily. Next slide. Also, the physical environment is needed to spread the light around. There's a number of sources of light in this image here, and light colored walls. Again, RP28 recommends, I think it's 60 and above, maybe it's 50 and above for walls. Ceilings, of course, would be much more, would be lighter, and so that the darker things do pop out so that you can see the difference in the color of the wall to the frames, but also you have to, if you have dark colors on the walls, you aren't spreading the light around. You're absorbing it and paying the energy bill for that, but yet not providing for the needs of seniors. This is a senior facility. So here we have different sources. We've got some wall wash light coming down, have kind of a direct, indirect on the ceiling. So the way I like to light is indirectly so that I know that I won't have a glare problem. Next slide. It's also important to have light in kind of consistency in the interior environment. Just as I pointed out for the slow adaptation rate for older people, at that time talking about the outside light compared to inside light, but yet it could be from one space to another. You need to have more of a uniformity of light levels so that the older eye isn't trying to make that adjustment between a low light level and a high light level, just walking through their space. This was documented by a research project, and I think it was in Sweden, where they first did higher light levels in the living area, but they didn't do the hallway. And that's where they found that people were starting to fall more. So the next study treated the hallway just as the same level of intensity as the living space, and they didn't have the falls at that time. So uniformity is really what we need in light levels. Next slide. And I really encourage daylighting through diffused daylight. The image on the right, you can see that the overhead skylight is diffused. However, there's clear windows at the end, and you can see that sunbeam coming in. So that's the kind of thing you would have if you had a clear skylight. You would have that kind of situation happening all through the space. So that a nice diffused skylight is really best. The image on the left actually has two forms of daylight. The atrium space that we're kind of seeing in the picture on the right is to the right, but then the daylight from the outside is to the left. But they have indirect lighting bouncing again off the ceiling, lighting that space. Next slide. So I encourage people to get outdoors. It won't, when we were doing the research, we really had to work on the controls and the computers and the head of maintenance went on vacation, but his computer was controlling our light dimming system. And so it's all of these things that people don't think about that can be problematic in doing just an installation as well as a research project. So if you can just get people to go outdoors, and so you, as I would say, for someone who focuses on interior spaces and lighting, I would say don't cut the budget of the landscape, because that's what we need to entice people to get outdoors. And as you can see, the couple on the right, they're just enjoying the day. But if, it does rain, and so a nice overhang gives you shelter, because I've measured the light level outside in Oregon, and we know it rains a lot here, but I found that the light level in the morning, even if it was raining, was still high enough that I got the dose of circadian light that I needed. So, okay, there we go. So on bright days, we need the blue rich daylight to be in our eyes, follow what Laurie was talking about. Next slide. But then there's also vitamin D on our skin. Now you have to be outdoors for that, and without sunscreen on for at least 15, maybe 30 minutes. And we need vitamin D for our immune system. We need vitamin D for our bones and muscles, and it's better than just taking supplements, because you can have a kind of a toxic reaction if you're taking too much of the vitamin D supplements. So the best thing is to find an activity outdoors that you'll do for a while, just to have time to spend there. Maybe it's just sitting and bird watching, whatever it is, but get out and expose as much skin to the sun as you feel like showing. So next slide, please. So this is a retirement center on the right with the diffused skylights above. And so these people have daylight 3 times a day, because this is where they get their meals. And so if you have to choose between what you're going to spend money on, to me, if you could do a skylit area where the dining room is, then you would have that natural light, changing light, intensity of the light, and so that you don't have to rely totally on electric lighting. So, and when you're inside, if you don't have skylights, then you need to be close to the window. And Kyle Kuhn is down in LA, has done a lot of research on this, and his research indicates that you need to be within 9 feet from the window to have an effect. That you, if you're looking straight at it, or you could be to the side of it, but with your back to it, it's not doing you any good. So that's why I recommend skylights over, I prefer windows because you get a nice view, but also don't just rely on those, because not everyone would be looking toward that window view. Next slide. As I mentioned, glare is enemy number 1 for older people, because of depends on what eye disease they have or whatever, but it's very painful. So you have to find a way to light that space without any exposed bulbs or any severe brightness. So this is just a diagram to show you how the eye changes from age 20 to 80, and the increased sensitivity to glare as we age. So that's why we need to do it in a different way rather than maybe what has been common. And I would like to point out that the hospitality industry has just launched onto the wrong thing. You've got exposed bulbs with a dark black or bronze background, and that is just setting up a condition for glare. But yet you still see it in award-winning senior images. We're trying to change that, but change is slow. Next slide. Example of hospitality lighting. Look at all of those exposed bulbs. Now the corridor on the right is a senior care facility with these candelabra-based bulbs that expose brightness. So it would be glary. You'd have to look at the floor in order to avoid doing that. But you should be, you need to look at the walls to see the room numbers and where you're going. So these are, it might be sparkly, it might be glitzy, but it's the wrong thing for a senior environment. Next slide. And then there's glare. You can see the brightness, the polished floor in this cafeteria style room. Again, a senior facility, but look at the reflection of the daylight from the windows as well as the reflection from the overhead fluorescent lights. Now, this needs to be avoided. Anything highly polished surface needs to be avoided. So if you look down the corridor on the lower one on the right, or middle, I should say, there's electric light on one side, but there's rooms also on the other side of the corridor, but they have no light coming in. But also look at the extreme brightness of that glass from the daylight outside. So that would be painful for an older person to look toward that when they're trying to navigate down that corridor. So it would be far better to have the window on the side, so it's and a solid wall or a solid door at the end of that corridor, so that you're having the lighting the thing that you want people to know about, but not creating that glare bomb at the end of that corridor. Next slide. So this on the left, there's the good and the bad. Daylight, great. Indirect lighting, terrific, but lose those shiny floors. Look at all the reflected glare from the windows far at the end on that floor, all the way. So you're experiencing that whether you like it or not. Also, really dark walls. This photograph on the right was taken at a hotel. You know, you're supposed to be able to read the room number so you aren't walking into the wrong room, but having the recessed down light, not really lighting the wall, but lighting the floor and partial door doesn't help you at all. So and the dark colors are just sucking up the light that you do have in there. So think about how efficient you are using the light when you select wall colors. So again, maybe if you're an engineer, you don't have control, but you can certainly talk to the interior designer who's making those decisions about why it's important. Next slide. So the other kind of scary thing, and this citation is in the information provided, is that they have found, this was, I think they reviewed like 100 studies and found that with severe vision impairment, it leads to cognitive decline or dementia. And so, as I say, to you as a professional and you as a family member, please encourage your family to get all the eye treatment they can, you know, to get their cataract surgery if they're recommended for that, and make certain your glasses are updated. The one thing that I find is that they don't, when you're admitted into nursing home, they don't actually address the question of your vision, and they don't test the vision for people who are in nursing homes. But yet we have a high rate of accidents because of the vision impairment of people living in care facilities. So on the research projects that we're starting on, we will be measuring the actually eye vision conditions of every subject that's in that study, so that we know what we're talking about, because otherwise it's just a guess. So, but you as a professional can design better lighting and better lighted environments. So those light walls and no glare, no polished floors, all of those things are really going to help people with their vision as well. But the reference studies will talk about other of falls and the percentage of falls relative to loss of field of view and visual acuity, as opposed to the increases really in contrast sensitivity. So these are the resources that Laurie and I have contributed. And there's, Lynn, I guess it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Eunice and Laurie, for a wonderful presentation. Just wanted to recap our learning objectives. So we heard about common eye diseases in the aging population and how these eye diseases can restrict light entering the eye, and also talked about how the impact of the aging eye can affect not only vision, but also circadian rhythm. We learned about lighting design strategies that can help to mitigate the impact of the eye aging, and also recommended practices in RP 28 that the IES provides to how to light an environment for the older adults and the visually impaired.
And again, thank you for your time today. We're thankful for all of our continuing members and your participation in today's webinar. Keep an eye on your email to sign up for our next educational webinar. And remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that like button. Have a great day. Goodbye for now, everyone.